Thank you all for coming. Today's Friday evening. It's my first time. When I came here, I was talking to Mark. It's my first time to Albany, but I was very curious when I was coming here because one of the books that impacted me when I was in high school, it was required reading for a lot of us, was Ironweeds. And later on, when I became a filmmaker, I was very affected by the movie by Hector Babenco, the director, with Jack Nicholson and Meryl Streep. So I always had this vision of what Albany looked like, which obviously is probably the wrong film to think about Albany. Depression era, homelessness, and all these different scenes that you know from the film and the book. But obviously because the film, was such a big part of my storytelling education growing up, I was very interested in coming up here. So thank you for coming. I just want to just preface real quick about this film because it was made over 20 years ago, and just a little bit why I made the film. So I'm Vietnamese American, born in Vietnam, became to America when I was about a year and a half, and fell in love with cinema when I was very young. And all the films I had seen about Vietnam were the ones that we grew up watching and know about, the famous ones, right? Like Apocalypse Now, Deer Hunter, Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, all these films. And, when you're young, you don't think about it, but you watch these films, like, oh, it's so great. Then you get old and you realize, even though it's about the Vietnam War, the Vietnamese people were rarely portrayed as anything more than background characters. And that started to sort of affect me as I got older. And then when I decided to become an artist and a filmmaker, one of my early intentions was to bring those background characters to the foreground and make them the central characters, and not just people who run through the jungles and get shot at or holding guns, but real people, three-dimensional, and the heroes of their own stories. And in doing so, also people who are flawed, which you can see in this film. And so that was, an important thing for me to do. And also the early films, whenever they portrayed a Vietnamese person, the person was actually typically not even Vietnamese, because the films were shot in the Philippines or Thailand. It was never in the Vietnamese language, so it was basically they would just speak what we call like sort of Asian gibberish, and people would say, "Oh, that's good enough. That sounds like Vietnamese. No one's gonna know the difference." So there was a few, I had a list of things that I wanted to make sure I accomplished to make this film. One, everything you see in this film was shot on the actual soil and land of Vietnam. All the Vietnamese are spoken, or real Vietnamese, by Vietnamese actors and individuals. And obviously what I said earlier about, and then I just want to make a film that there are hints to the war, but the film itself is not about war. I want to make sure no one's holding a gun, no one's being shot at, all that kind of stuff, because, pretty much all of our understanding of Vietnam was through that lens, and I wanted to change that. The last thing I want to say is, in terms of the characters of the film, at that time, in the late 90s, I was out of college, and I was, just out of college, spending a lot of time in Vietnam, and Vietnam was just in the transition period. Vietnam and America had renewed ties in 1995, so the West was just coming back, and with that, a lot of the Western influences and this rise of the hotels, but because I was an artist and college student, broke, and I was spending a lot of time on the streets with a lot of the working class and the underclass of Vietnam, and they ended up being the ones who populated, my writing and in this film. And one of the lines in this film, one of the lines that's inspired the film, it's in the film, came from a real cyclo driver, and basically he said, so all these hotels are starting to rise in the late 90s, and he says, we are the ones we aren't the ones who live within the hotels. We live in the shadows, and the higher the hotels, the longer the shadows. And so I decided to make this film and dedicate it to the people who lived within those shadows. Thank you.
Now, a few words about tonight's guest. Tony Bui was born in Vietnam and came to the U.S. with his family in 1975 at the age of 2 as a refugee of the U.S.-Vietnam War, leaving Vietnam approximately 1 week before the fall of Saigon. This film, 3 seasons, made a quarter century ago, was the first film to receive both the Grand Jury Prize and the Audience Award at the Sundance Film Festival in 1999, and was featured again at the festival's 40th anniversary in 2024 as one of only 10 groundbreaking independent films to highlight the festival's 40-year history. Tony's other feature films as director include Green Dragon, 2001, and The Throwaways, 2015. His short film, Yellow Lotus, 1997, was the first Vietnamese language film to be screened at the Sundance Film Festival and received more than 15 national and international festival awards. He's currently artist in residence at Columbia University's Weatherhead East Asian Institute and teaches in Columbia's School of the Arts graduate film program. Please welcome Tony Bui. You're got so many questions for you. It's a powerful emotional experience to watch that film. It's my third time. Unfair question. In your imagination, where is Woody now?
That's actually a really good question. I go back and forth to Vietnam a lot, and I've seen obviously a lot of changes since the 90s when I was going there to now, and I've seen Vietnam go through some, sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of motion, with a lot of different issues as it's trying to find itself and its identity, its place in the world, economically, socially, and everything. But in the last 5 to 10 years, it's been an amazing jump with the country opening up in so many amazing ways for artists, for students. I speak at a lot of schools around Vietnam. So I would like to think that he would be a beneficiary of those successes and those programs. Where exactly, it's hard to say, but I like to think that the structure that was set up and what I've seen in the last 10 to 15 years would have supported someone like him and whatever he wanted to do.
Great answer. So you were 26 when you made this?
Well, if you want to get technical, I was actually 24.
24 when you made this.
And then I turned 25 in the middle of production, but the film was released when I was 26.
Okay, so crazy stuff for a 24-year-old filmmaker. I read that.
But I read Ironweeds,
Right. But I read that you needed to plant those lotuses 3 months in advance.
Yeah.
That you built the temple in a studio and moved it to that location. I
did. I don't always want to talk about it because it ruins the magic of the film. But since you brought it up, yes, a lot of people think that a lot of times, people watch the film and say, oh, where is this location, that lotus and the temple, and they want to go visit it. We actually created that entire location. And even though it's inspired by obviously real places and the vision of it, and I've seen many places not exactly like that, but versions like that in my travels. But to have a version that would fit the storytelling and in a way that we can film it, we had to build it. So we found a lake just outside of Saigon, and unbeknownst to me at the time when I was writing it, I didn't know that white lotuses couldn't grow in the South, So we had to, and there was no pond or lake like that would have a temple like that. So we actually built it. We built the entire temple inside a soundstage, found the lake, and then bit by bit would rebuild that, would dismantle it, build it again, and then on top of the middle of the lake. And I don't want to get into exactly how we did that, but we did. And there was a few times, and because I wanted the lotuses, and we had to plant them, so we planted like 10,000 of these in the lake. But it takes like 3 months to grow. So we during pre-production would plant it, and then in the shooting schedule, positioned it so we would shoot those scenes last. So at the end of the shooting schedule, when it would grow, we would shoot those scenes. But again, it's one of those things where, it's easy to write, much harder to film. And what I didn't realize is that you don't get consistent flowers because a lot of times some will die, some will wilt. You get different growths. So then I don't want to give away the magic. We ended up having to plant like 5,000 fake ones, even though the film was all about the relationship between the real flowers and the fake flowers. we actually had to plant the fake flowers to shoot them to make like the real flowers, even though thematically it was about how fake flowers were, you saw the film. So anyways, so that was, but that's the only way we can shoot, get that consistency, shoot different angles, and still have the same look, because, those flowers die, and especially if we bump into them in our camera, the cameras are on the boats and stuff like that.
For me, that adds to the magic. I mean, that enhances the magic. I mean, it says, it not only says so much about your ambition, but your incredible loyalty to your artistic vision. I mean, to me, that's one of the, it's like a Werner Herzog, insisting.
I have a funny story about that. Well, I want to add to it. That's not even the full story. So, like, different times in pre-production, my crew would come up to me and say, "Do you really want a temple in the middle of the lake? Because this is becoming really difficult." And I would say, "Yes, and here are the reasons why." And I explain it thematically, and he's an isolated person, and a poet, but a landowner, and he's sort of, pulled himself away from society because of his leprosy and the flowers and all that. And there's all this symbolic value. And I said, it wouldn't make the same if the temple was on, the land next to the lake. It had to be in the middle of the lake, surrounded by his own flowers, in which you cannot go out and see, and visit and touch and stuff like that. So, there was a lot of, are you sure you want this? How are we going to do this? Figure it out. But in the end, the engineers and the architect and everyone who built it did such an amazing job that usually when you shoot something like that, you then go into a sound stage and shoot the interiors. But the temple was built so solidly and so firmly that we actually shot all the interiors in the film inside that temple on top of that lake, which is insane.
Yeah. I mean, it's a quixotic achievement, but it's an incredible achievement.
No, without a doubt. So, but the Werner Herzog story. So, anyways, if you guys, Werner Herzog, this amazing but a little bit crazy German filmmaker who made this film called Fitzcarraldo and had this documentary called The Burner of Dreams, and he was sort of like he's not the first, but definitely one of the more famous filmmakers who's sort of been attributed with the concept of just being a little crazy on set, who would do the craziest kinds of shoots and put his crew through, hell and back, and
drag a 350-ton boat over a hill, in order to be authentic and
exactly, and because the characters' love for opera and all that, and in the Amazon, and in my short film Yellow Lotus, which you mentioned earlier, was a precursor to this film, which is also a very difficult film to make. And, we shot in monsoon. It was just, I felt like, it was one of those films where, in that film, I was 21. I couldn't even imagine going through that today, But back then, you don't know what you're about to get into, so you're like, okay, let's do it. And then it's like, you basically go through hell and back. The first festival I ever played at was in Telluride, which our conversation earlier is run by Tom Luddy, who was Francis Ford Coppola's producer. And so, first screening ever at Telluride, I screen it, and Werner Herzog's in the audience. I didn't really know at the time. It goes up, it gets this amazing reception, it finishes, the program is over, and as I was leaving, it starts to rain. So everyone starts, ducking for cover, and I found this small space, underneath this awning, where basically two people can fit. So I sort of put myself underneath it to get out of the rain, and this bigger guy kind of settles himself next to me, and I look over and it's Werner Herzog. I'm like, oh my God, I shot Yellow Lotus. It's so crazy. He did, Fitzcarraldo. So I said, Mr. Herzog, I'm the student filmmaker. I just made this film called Yellow Lotus, and I just want to say that I feel this connection to you because of Fitzcarraldo and Burner of Dreams and this difficulty of shooting in the real world and real setting and stuff like that. In a thick German accent. I'm not going to try it, but he was like, all filmmaking is tough. It's even tough as in a soundstage. You don't need to brag about how tough it is, And I was like, you make a really good point. And so ever since then, I tried to not stop talking about how difficult it is to make films because everyone goes through a lot of difficulties making films. You can be in a soundstage and it's really difficult.
And this was, we didn't set this up. I had no idea that he had an anecdote about Werner Herzog.
But I thought I was kind of this amazing connection to him. Like, yeah, we bleed for our films. And he was like, you know, it's. I think I was being overly romantic about how difficult it is to make movies.
Amazing. So I'm going to ask a few more questions, and then I'm going to open it up to all of you. I don't know if this, I mean, to me, this adds to the magic. You worked on that poetry with your mom in order to get poetry in the Vietnamese language, in order to make sure that it was authentically Vietnamese. Can you tell us about that?
That is true. I don't know where you did all this research, but that is true. So, you know, I mean, I speak Vietnamese, but I don't read or write it well. And my mom sort of grew up as a sort of amateur poet, so that energy was in her home a lot, and especially with literature and the fact that she would write these, you know, she had books of poetry all the time. We had this library, so I grew up around a lot of stories. I had no idea I was going to be a filmmaker. We just had this, you know, and of course, I knew about my mom's love for poetry. So when I wrote the script and all those scenes with all the poems, I write in English. That's how I best express myself. And so my mom then would translate everything into Vietnamese. So I would write the poetry in English, and she would translate it into Vietnamese, and then in doing so, actually elevated the poetry. I would take it, we went through several drafts, and then, you know, I would then translate back to English, and I felt like in that translation, it forced me to really understand what she added to it. Then I felt like in my translation back to English, it elevated the whole script and the poetry. And then I would go through more drafts and give it back to her to translate again. And then she would have to add more to it. And in that process, we ended up finding, I think, the right voice for that poetry. So what you see in there is actually a process of translations back and forth to my mom and myself.
And was that a smooth collaborative relationship, or was there tension? Forgive me for asking, but...
That itself, there wasn't tension, but the tension comes from something else. When I decided at about 15 or 16 years old I wanted to be a filmmaker, my mom had a breakdown. She started crying. And she was very upset by it. And basically, you know, my parents were refugees, came here, sacrificed everything, and, you know, and they put all their sort of hopes and dreams on me. And I did well in high school, and I grew up in the Bay Area, and basically, in my entire life growing up, I was only given two options, Stanford or Berkeley, and that's it, you know, and everything else in our family would be considered a failure. So when I said, I was like a sophomore in high school, and I said I want to be a filmmaker, my mom just lost it, and she thought I would grow out of it. I didn't. She would do everything she could to try to talk me out of it. And my cousin was a doctor. She's like, oh, go spend 3 months with your cousin, all that kind of stuff. I didn't. And first year in college, I pretended I was going to actually engineering school. I didn't. I was secretly going to film school. But they were so busy doing business, this and that, they didn't know I was actually doing film classes. When she found out, she was very upset. So in my college years, going to film school, there's so much tension because basically, you know, at that age, you're already going through a lot of, you're rebelling already, and then your parents basically not supporting what you want to do, and in fact, no one supported, not a single family member. My friends thought I was crazy. Everyone thought I was crazy. So there's all this tension, and it started to soften, and when obviously with Yellow Lotus becoming successful, and then when I got this film greenlit and all that. So so by the time I got to this point, and she started helping me with this, it was sort of a step into, mending a lot of that pain of all those years of being in school and basically, my parents, more my mom thought I was crazy, but so that was sort of helped close some of that gap that was formed between us. But there's an extra piece to the story. Is cut to like 15 years later, my mom calls me and says, I've been thinking about it. I think I want to do some screenwriting. I was like, what? After all that, there were some nights where I literally was crying because, it was such a difficult journey to become a filmmaker. And now you want to be a filmmaker and want to be a screenwriter? You want me to help you? And so she did. She went and got a screenwriting book and wrote some screenplays. Now my aunt's a screenwriter. She's a screenwriter, and all these people are suddenly screenwriters. So.
We recently had a visitor to the Writers Institute, Sharon Washington, who writes plays, Tony-nominated playwright, and she literally grew up inside a branch of the New York Public Library where her father was a custodian, and so she had free run of the library after hours and stuff like that. Grew up in this very kind of bookish playground and became a significant playwright. You grew up in and around video stores. Is that correct?
That is correct, but I thought you were going to something else. I was going to say, how in the world did you know? Because you brought up a library. So I want to, before the video stores, I actually grew up in a library as well, but for a different reason. Not because my I had members who were custodians, but because it was cheap babysitting for my parents. Right. So they literally would take us, there's two places they would take us. One, they would drop us off at the Hacienda Cinema on El Camino Real in Northern California. And at that time, you could buy one ticket and just basically sit there all day if you want. So they would drop off my siblings and I, as we were in when it opened, and then not come back for literally 10 hours later. And they would give us some money. So I grew up eating hot dogs and nachos. I'm still, because it's the West Coast, I'm still a big lover of Red Vines. I know you guys do Twizzlers on the East Coast. And then I became incredibly, I was really good at playing Pac-Man because I had a couple of these you put a quarter in, but I had 10 hours to kill. So I watch a lot of movies, play a lot of video games, and eat really bad food. But that's what, but she felt we were safe at the movie theaters. So that was my introduction to the love of cinema. And the other places, she would just leave us for hours at the library. I mean, so long sometimes, I think the librarians felt bad for us because the library would close and we would just stand out in front of the library waiting for our parents. And my mom would always be late, so we were just sitting there. So it was just basically high school. And junior high, and basically just walk to the library and just wait there until it closed, until my parents would come and pick us up. But it was amazing, right? I mean, it kept us out of trouble, and around books. And looking back, again, nothing in my childhood told me I was going to be a filmmaker. But when I put the pieces together, there was obviously this love for books, storytelling, literature, and stuff like that indirectly affected me. But then, yes, and then got to a point where my dad was working, in tech, and got laid off, and ended up deciding to try this thing, called video stores, and it was a massive success. And at the height of it, my dad, had 5 video stores in the Bay Area, and that's what did it. That was sort of the tipping point. And I had to work out in the video stores, and we had to work on the weekends and box them up, put them out there. So all these movies would come through our home, come to the video store, and I would just watch, never thinking that I wanted to be a filmmaker. But once you watch, I'm not talking about dozens or even hundreds of thousands of movies, you start to see patterns. And then this love for storytelling that was formed when I was younger, it was a natural progression for me, especially for someone who's, I think I was trying to find a way to express myself, and then more recently, when I started to think about my childhood in the past, I realized something, because I think about it a lot. No one in our family, is a filmmaker. Well, later on, I found out I had an uncle in Vietnam who was in the business, but I didn't know him growing up. So, but I realized something, and this is as refugee parents. And when I say refugee, I don't mean refugee from one country to another. You could be a refugee by leaving a state to another state, from one state to another state. Any family individual seeking refuge in something, you carry all these stories with you, and just by association, having friends over and all that, you tell these stories, right? And as a child, I'm sitting there, I'm absorbing all this indirectly through osmosis or whatever. So I was around people just telling stories all the time without even thinking about it. So I think that added to, and the stories are always dramatic, right? Because it's war and being a refugee and leaving home and all this stuff. So I think those stories were already affecting me, and so when the library and the video stores and all that, and the hacienda, babysitting era and all that, I think everything just kind of folded into this, the sweet spot of wanting to be a filmmaker. Well, not so sweet at the time, but and then so it's a natural progression, and to my parents' great dismay, I said, yeah, I want to go to film school.
So I'm going to just make one more comment, and maybe I'll discover a question in the comment, and then I'll turn it over to all of you. One of the reasons that I connected so powerfully to this film is that it's about rapid transformation, economic upheaval, world changing so fast, and there are people who are being left behind. There are young people today who are afraid of being left in the shadows, of whatever these crazy technological transformations, these deaths and births of institutions. Is that something that you feel too, revisiting this film, or is that something that, or is it really just a creation of a particular moment in time, a particular place, or does it have the kind of resonance for you that I feel as well?
Well, absolutely, absolutely. One of the, I made the film a long time ago, and I never had a digital version of it. We only digitized it last year, and so, we were talking earlier, there's actually a 4K version of this film that's been restored. Unfortunately,
We tried to get it, we couldn't.
Yeah, you couldn't get it. And also, I don't think your projectors can show a DCP, but there's a 4K restored version of this film, and we went back to the negative, meticulously restored every single frame to absolutely stunning colors. And so there's a 4K version, and that's been playing, and after that Sundance sort of rebirth, last year when I was chosen as one of the 10, it's been playing the festival circuit and doing all this amazing stuff. We played at the Lincoln Center, and we played at the Smithsonian, played all these amazing locations, and the 4K version of this is absolutely stunning. And we spent a long time going back, finding a native, going frame by frame. But for, over 15 years, we never, over 2 decades, we never had a digital version. So I actually, didn't really see the film. Every now and then we would project it if someone needed to, like a festival or something, or art house theater, some kind of retrospective. But even then, when I had sat down to see it again, just really 2 years ago, I had not seen the film for over 10 years. So I actually forgot a lot of the film. And when you make a film, you actually never see the same film as the audience sees, because all you see are all the mistakes. You see what you wanted to do but couldn't. You see you see all the imperfections. You see everything in between. But once the 10 years goes by, and I was able to finally restore it and then see it all the way through again for the first time, I actually forgot so many moments that I got to see it as an audience member, and it was actually kind of mind blowing to me. And it was the only time where I probably felt, oh yeah, this is not bad, and I felt like really proud to make this film, because all the other times I just felt like, oh, you just go through all these moments where you wish this could have been better, wish you had another take here, an extra day to shoot there. But the thing, to your point, the thing that I'm most proud of is I really do feel the film captured something that was really resonant, that not only really captured the moment. I mean, the film is really a time capsule now of Saigon in the late 90s. It looks like that. I mean, a magazine just did a thing where they went back to a lot of locations I shot and took scenes from this film and shot what those locations looked like now in Saigon. It's completely changed, completely different. But the film really does capture a moment in time. And a moment in time, and a lot of the themes in this film was very, very, that presence of the the westernization and everything coming back, that big Coca-Cola sign. Those are all things that I witnessed, and it's only sort of, escalated from there. But the country was very much in transition then, and it's still now. So that transition is something that it's transitioning in different ways and different looks, but that energy of transition, to be honest, is only amplified since this film has been made.
So we'd love to take some questions.
And I have a microphone I can bring.
Jen in the back has a microphone.
Yeah.
So if you wave your hand aggressively or timidly, you can wave it timidly as well.
Hi, Tony. I'm actually Vietnamese American, so I know what it means to disappoint a Vietnamese mother.
Yes.
But my question to you is, we've seen a lot of Vietnamese literature, like recently, just in the last 15 years, but we haven't actually seen a lot of Vietnamese films come out. And why do you think that is?
We've seen a lot of Vietnamese literature, but not a lot of Vietnamese films.
Yes. In the mainstream American.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Vietnamese films also being made in Vietnam, and there are films made. So, just I think it's when 3 Seasons was at Sundance, it was the first feature-length Vietnamese film ever at Sundance. When my short was at Sundance, it was the first Vietnamese language film of any kind at Sundance. So, it's just there's just not a big pool to choose from, but also there just wasn't a lot of, I think there's a generation that's coming now where, it's like that first generation, refugees coming, you're expected to do the stuff that is more responsible, right? You end up doing stuff that, again, it's the doctors, the engineers, the lawyers, all the stuff that like sort of that those Vietnamese parents want you to do. But once that's settled, the next generation, I think, is allowed to choose more freely what you want to do. So we see this wave of artists now forming, and there's a boom in Vietnamese storytelling literature, Vietnamese American storytelling literature, and also in Vietnam. And there is a lot more Vietnamese films being made. They haven't maybe hit mainstream yet, but there's a lot more. There's something called the Viet Film Fest, which is coming up soon. That would never have existed, it's existed for a while now, but the amount of films now at the festival plays, compared to years ago, it's increased dramatically. Excuse me. But there's also been a change in Asian cinema in general, where there's been this wave of more acceptance of Asian cinema, especially with Parasite winning the Oscars and Everything Everywhere All at Once, and then really that boom with Crazy Rich Asians and all that. And there's an article in the New York Times recently where it talked about how people are much more comfortable now watching films with subtitles, right? So that's a big thing. So all these changes, allow for, a lot more Vietnamese cinema to be made and seen. So it's actually improving and it's growing, but simultaneously with that, cinema in America is, it's going through a transition right now. If you want to really look at it, so there's more acceptance of films with subtitles in Asian cinema, and with that, Vietnamese cinema. But, that whole art house independent sort of film scene in America is on the decline, and it's very unfortunate. There used to be a lot of art house theaters all around, and these films would play in the theaters and can be in the theaters for weeks, and that stuff that's very rare now, But there are a lot more Vietnamese films. You just have, I think, and more Vietnamese films represented in some of the major festivals as well. But it hasn't quite hit mainstream. But also mainstream cinema has changed and evolved, where even non-Vietnamese films, just American independent films, it's hard to find space in, mainstream theaters, but that's a whole different conversation.
Next. Another question?
Oh, yeah. No, we can start with you.
Well, congratulations. It was an amazing movie.
Thank you.
For me, it's very difficult to think in a person conceptualizing a movie like that is 22 years old or 24. It's like the level of maturity and the introspection, it's fantastic. So my questions are, what are the events that inspired you to write this story? And which movies or directors you find like an inspiration for the style of this specific work?
What was the second part of the question? Which directors what?
Inspired, or you feel that it's giving you like a clue or a path
Which film directors inspired me to make this film? Is that what
exactly, this specific one.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
So to answer your first part, you know, I never set out to make this kind of film. To be honest with you, when I decided to become a filmmaker, I thought I was gonna make completely different, you know, like I'll just say different kinds of movies. And when I was 19, I went back to Vietnam for the first time. I was born there, but for me it was the first time because I had no memory of being born there. And it was a transformative experience. And it would change the films I would watch. It would change the books I always say, you know, it would change the books I would read, the films I would watch, and my, you know, understanding of Vietnam. And now I would be pulled back over and over again. So I would go there during the summertime, winter breaks, you know, when I was in school, and really just spend a lot of time. And because I still had some family there, and I was spending a lot of time there, like an entire summer and stuff, I didn't approach Vietnam as like a tourist would. I would just really. And I was saying earlier, you know, because I was like also like a poor student, I would just spend a lot of times on motorbikes and hanging out with a lot of the locals, and you know, almost every character in this film were characters that I knew or met during that time period of my life. Some are composite characters, some were based on real people I had met or known, and a lot of the dialogue in this film, especially from the cyclo drivers and others, were dialogue that I heard firsthand. That, you know, and I used to keep a diary, you know, like a little notebook with me, and I wrote everything down. All, you know, when I was all those years I was in Vietnam. So you know, it was like year after year after year, and from that 19 to about 23, and so you know, I think and those years had such a impact on me, and their stories and these characters and these individuals, I mean, had such an impact on me that creating these stories honestly just felt so incredibly easy and natural and real and almost like purposeful, but in a way that felt like it was something that, you know, I had no choice but to write about these characters in the way that I did. So yeah, so that's, you know, that's the answer to the first. At least a simplistic way of answering it. The second is I was influenced by, you know, Herzog. I was influenced by a huge Chinese filmmaker named Zhang Yimou at the time. So it was the 90s, and he made those amazing films. He was part of this wave of Chinese filmmakers called the fifth generation Chinese filmmakers. And that gave me this sort of vision that, oh my God, you can make films about people who look like you, right? Because I grew up obviously loving all, you know, American cinema, but no one looked like me. But, you know, not that and honestly, it didn't bother me, but then you start watching films where people kind of look like you. You're like, oh my God! You realize there was actually a void and something missing, and then sort of my understanding of cinema, its power, its impact, its purpose, you know, completely changed. So filmmakers like Zhang Yimou did that for me. Of course, Ang Lee, you know, in that time period, in America, Wayne Wang, and then. But I was, you know, I went to film schools. I was a huge student of Russian cinema. So Tarkovsky was a huge influence on me. My short film was almost like an homage to Tarkovsky, and all the European filmmakers, of course. But the big one for me was De Sica, the Italian filmmaker. So you know, all the, so you know, and you know, with De Sica, he made a lot of films about real world people, the underclass, the working class, and that affected me deeply. And so that was a sort of an easy jump from those influences to what I was seeing in Vietnam at the time, and deciding that these are the people I wanted to, you know, highlight in my storytelling.
One more question, maybe.
I know. Hold on.
Hello, hi. I was really shocked by the depth of this movie. It's about the underdogs, people we might not even notice if we travel around in Asia, people who drive cyclos, and to make them into such humane people filled with love and such great characters. I was really touched.
Thank you.
Didn't quite expect that. I was just wondering how a 24-year-old pulled off a project like that? I mean, you've got to have funding. You had a whole list of people who were doing makeup, doing everything. You had the temple built somewhere and built inside and put. How did you get the funding? How did you pull that off?
So, you know, the easy answer of all that, there actually is a process. I know it seems incredibly overwhelming if just looking at it sort of, you know, from the outside in, but honestly, it all starts with the screenplay. And, you know, I had made a short film, which was really big short film. I mean, we shot many locations, and, you know, it was a short film that I tried to bond with Werner Herzog in, even though, I wasn't fully successful, but that opened the door for me for people to go, oh, wow, you can make that short film, what else can you make? And I had written the first draft of 3 seasons already. And so it all comes down to the screenplay, because screenplay really puts, you know, you have to, I mean, everything's in the film was in the screenplays, it was all written out. And the screenplay, and what really did it was that the screenplay got accepted into the Sundance Screenwriters Lab. And for those who don't know, the Screenwriters, Directors and Writers Lab is probably the most prestigious writing and film lab in the world, and was the starting point for filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino, Paul T. Anderson, who made There Would Be Blood and Phantom, Phantom Thread and all that, and of course everyone knows Tarantino, and Chloe Zhao, who won the Oscar for Nomadland, and I mean, just Barry Jenkins, who won the Oscar for Moonlight. So it's like the starting point of so many notable filmmakers and artists. And yeah, I wrote the first draft, and you know, Michelle Satter, who's one of the co-founders of the lab, is just incredible, really matriarch of American independent cinema, we all call her. She had seen Yellow Lotus and actually rang me up and said she was deeply moved by it and wanted to know if I was working on something else. And I said I was. I said I only had this first draft of the script. And she said, send it in. And I did. And, you know, that started everything, because it got accepted into the lab. And I spent time at the lab, workshopped the script with these amazing mentors, including one who just passed away a few days ago. Rest in peace, Robert Redford. So, and he was an amazing supporter of this film and worked with me in the editing room, and when I was workshopping this project, and including a bunch of other amazing mentors. And but that lab gave this project, which is so, I mean, to be at that time, I would go to meetings and people would read the script and go, "Oh, this is an amazing script, we want to make it." Then I would tell them it would be in Vietnamese, and they would literally basically show me the door and say, "I'm sorry, we can't make this film. It's going to be in Vietnamese," you know. And but the lab gave it the, gave people, the lab made people take interest in the screenplay because it validated the screenplay. And without that, I don't think this project would ever gotten made. So from that, then producers came on board, the financiers got interested, and obviously what put it all together was eventually we sent the script to Harvey Keitel. And I know I told this story before, but Harvey Keitel is a champion of cinema. He helped Scorsese when he was super young, helped Tarantino in his first film, Abel Ferrara in his first film, and in the 90s, basically, if you got Harvey Keitel in your film is going to get greenlit. And every film student, he was almost like the god of independent cinema. Not almost, he was at the time, and was responsible for really finding first-time filmmakers and putting them on the map. So I had this one role of, the American GI, and so we sent him the screenplay, and I was shocked, I was stunned, and because he expressed interest and wanted to meet. So I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this. I said, it's Harvey Keitel, a legend. I actually had his poster on my wall when I was in film school. So I'll go to New York, and I meet him, and we meet, and he's like, I love your screenplay, I love the writing, it feels like literature to me, but I need to talk to you, Tony. And I was really pumped up, because I was like, oh my God, I'm going to meet Harvey Keitel, and he's going to be in my movie. And he's like, they're doing amazing things with prosthetics. I love the script, but I want to play the role of the leper monk. And so I went from this high to like this low, like within like seconds, and I was shocked. And I was like, wait, is Harvey Keitel asking me, telling me he wants to be in the film, which is amazing, but then asking me to play a Vietnamese man, you know, in the film, which there's no, you know, obviously we can't do that, right? And I said, but Harvey, I know you read the script in English, but the entire character he's going to speak Vietnamese. And Harvey paused for a second, and he went, oh, okay, never mind then. But he would agree to play, so because, you know, when we sent him the script, I never described which character because there's only one character he can play. You know, it was the character of the, you know, American Marine who comes back to Vietnam. So he actually had to think about it. So, because he had put his heart and soul and wanted to play, you know, the poet monk. And so it took about another 2-3 weeks. He actually asked for some rewrites, which I did, and then he agreed to be in the film. But yeah. So it was the language issue, you know, it was, you know, a lot of ups and downs, you know, you know, I would go to studio meetings, people who read the script and loved it, and like I was saying earlier, and when they found out, on the strength of the writing, but when they found out that it was going to be Vietnamese, they basically was like, no, we're not going to make it. But once Harvey came on board, and then everything, you know, the labs, everything came together, and then a company came in and financed it, and then from there, once it's greenlit, then you go crew up and everything else falls into place. I mean, still a lot of work and all that, but you know, it's just little by little, we were able to get the backing needed to give the film the credibility that it needed to get made.
So the Writers Institute owes Tony an enormous debt of gratitude. He has a massive project due on Monday. And he came anyway. Any reasonable person would have canceled.
Thank you. No, it's an honor to be here. Mark wrote like one of these invitation letters that I've never received before. I've been very fortunate to get invited to different schools to speak and festivals and art institutes, but your letter was very different, honestly, I felt like I was going to be part of a long history of amazing artists and speakers and who you've invited in the past, and I felt like, you know, it's actually an honor to be part of that and to have my name within those names of those other greats that you invited.
Let's honor him with a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.